Hi, I'm Elena, booktuber, bookstore owner and classics lover, and welcome to my somehow kind of wrap up of February. Of course, we still have a few days of February to go, but I have some books to talk to you about. This is going to be an interesting discussion, but I want to start with a classic series that I'm slowly falling in love with. I'll talk to you about my most recent reads and we'll go into the books I want to read in March in the second part of this video. So, Kristin Lavrensdatter is a Norwegian classic written by Sigrid Undset in the early 20th century. I think 1920 was when the first book was published. I had a goal this year to read this series in January, February, March. So I've read book 1 and 2. The first book is Kristin Lavrensdatter coming of age, and the second book is called The Wife, so we follow her in her marriage. This is set in Norway in the 14th century, and it's such a wonderful world. It almost feels like a Juliette Marillier style fantasy, which is kind of fantasy I'm really enjoying. I didn't expect I would enjoy reading books and stories set in the Middle Ages as much as I do. Also currently reading a fantasy that we'll talk about later that's also set in a similar period but more in the fantasy world, and I'm enjoying it so much. Yes, the first book I gave 4.5 stars. So we follow Kristin in a remote but tight-knit community. She adores her father and she has a more difficult relationship with her mother, mostly because they don't really understand each other, which I've always find an interesting mother-daughter relationship when it's so layered. And this book is mostly from Kristin's perspective. We get some perspectives from different characters. It's not very prevalent, but there are a few parts from her mother's perspective which makes that relationship even more interesting. She adores her father to a fault, especially in the second book. It really becomes an issue in her marriage. In the first book, her father betrothed her to quite an arrogant but kind man. It's quite usual in these regions in this time to have your parents pick a betrothed for you and to accept it. You are never forced, neither the man or the woman is ever forced, and she falls in love with a not so eligible man. He is, I want to say the Mr. Wickham, but way more layered. He is somehow a character that could very easily be a villain in, for example, a Victorian novel, or in a Jane Austen and Thomas Hardy. He would be the typical villain. She falls in love with him and things start to happen. In the second book we follow Kristin throughout her marriage, and the first half of the book, I found challenging because it's extremely religious, but it not in the sense that it's moralistic or anything. I don't feel like Sigrid Undset really has an opinion on religion, but Kristin really does. And I found it so admirable how Sigrid Undset, as a 20th century woman, really dove into the 14th century mindset of a woman of that time. I think Christianity was still quite young in Norway at this time, but it was very prevalent in the way that people made decisions, and especially in the way that people would judge themselves. We don't only see it with Kristin, we see it with her mother, with her father, who are very religious as well. Religion is always somehow a positive force in this book, which I feel is not something a more modern author often can pull off in a historical fiction. I don't know anything about Sigrid Undset, so I don't know if she herself was very Christian. I don't think it matters. What matters is that it's really important to Kristin and that she uses it as a way to find redemption for the mistakes that she knows she made, but I think indirectly also for mistakes that she is not so aware of, but that she does carry a lot of guilt for. I'm not gonna say too much about the plot of book 2 because of course it's a continuation. Book 2 was a 4-star for me, mostly because the first half was so character focus, which of course I enjoyed, but I kind of missed the plot because somehow this is quite an action-packed, plot-driven series, which I did not expect, but is I think part why I'm loving it so much. If it was only heavily character-based combined with faith being incredibly important, I don't think I would have enjoyed this as much as I did. Book 1 is a bit different than the rest of the series, especially the beginning of book 1. You really need some patience. You need to be able to push through for a bit, because I did not think I would love it as much as I'm doing right now in the first 100 pages. So in March I will read the last book, and I have to hold myself back because I need to read some book club reads, even though I kind of just want to read this. But I think it's also good to not read too much of it because I don't want to get sick of it, and it's over 1,000 pages. So it's a 4.5 and a 4, but I think it's definitely possible if the third book like blows it out of the park that the whole series will feel like a 5-star for me. We'll see. I'm very excited. And on a classic I'm not enjoying so much. I have soft DNF'd it, and that is the Watership Down. On Instagram stories I described it as Lord of the Rings things, but with bunnies. The only magic that is in here is that the rabbits and the other animals talk in a language that we can understand, but I don't think it's a fantastical world. I mean, maybe it will become a fantastical world later in the novel. I'm now halfway through. There's a Cassandra from Greek myth based character who has a premonition that something bad is going to happen. A few rabbits follow him and they leave, among whom Hazel, our main character, and it's just quite boring. It's quite boring. They get up to some things, but I just don't really care, and I soft DNF'd it when they together had a discussion that it was a problem that there were no women among them, because how could they have like a settlement with no women, because they would die out. And then they had a discussion of how they could find some women. They were looking for women because they wanted to procreate and they wanted a nice warm home with women and children, and they talked about getting some women as if they wanted to go and buy some carrots from different rabbits. That is like objectifying women next level. I love animals in books, but when authors use a human patriarchy to enlarge the sense of the patriarchy in the animal kingdom, I'm like, could you not? The author works quite hard in this book to give a realistic sense of what a rabbit's life is like, and then he uses such a human perspective on gender, which I found incredibly annoying. I watched a documentary and male and female rabbits do not live like that. I was bored, so I wasn't enjoying it, and then when that came along, I felt like, you know what, let's give this a soft DNF. Then I read the bestsellers of bestsellers. Of course, I won't talk too much about this because you're probably sick of it by now, but that is Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. This is the third book in the Fourth Wing series. I think it's called differently, I don't really care. This is dragons, romance, a school setting, just like all the things the fantasy girls, among whom I am, like. And this book worked as well for me as book 1 and 2. I think book 2 had some annoying things, and this wasn't annoying but a bit repetitive. I felt like the romance was very repetitive. There are a couple of scenes that almost feel the same throughout the book. I mean, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed those scenes, but I think we could have had less repetition and the book would have been more enjoyable. The dragons were amazing in this book. We got I cannot say anything about it, but like the dragons, they always steal the show for me. I would be very glad if we got in the future way more dragons and way less people, because I started reading this book. I didn't reread the first 2 books because I read them in January last year, so I felt that was quite recent for me. But there are way too many humans in this book and I got so confused, and I felt like, you know what, let's spark a lot of those humans in book 1 and 2 and let's get a little bit more from the dragons. There's a small dragon that we meet in book 1. My favorite character in the entire series. I'm so careful with talking about this book because it's of course a third book in the series and like it's so easy to spoil it. So I liked it as much as I liked the other ones. Excited for the rest of the series, that's all I will say. Hi, I'm interrupting this video really quick. Is this an ad? I don't know. It's for my own small business, so I guess so. But I want to mention that I've made a beginner's guide to classic literature. It is a free digital guide. It's 17 pages long. It has a lot of things that I also talk about in my videos. It has book recommendations. It has beginner's guides to authors, Instagram templates, and just me writing about my personal experience with classics, and of course telling you a little bit about the history of classics, the genres, the time periods, and where to start with your very first classic. If you like to get a beginner's guide, all you have to do is sign up to become an email member, which is also free, and then you will get the beginner's guide in your welcome email. I read, I think, just one literary fiction. That is Litte Rot by Ikwegi Emeze. I do have a vlog where I read all of their books. This was their newest release last year, so I felt like I need to read it. I pre-ordered this one, of course. I only read it a year later. I've seen quite a lot of critical reviews of this one, but I really enjoyed it. I do notice how desensitized I am for like heavy content in books, and that is, I think, me concluding that I read too many books because there are such awful things happening in this book. And it didn't really get to me. And it's not because the writing is bad. The writing is really good, but I just feel so desensitized by reading like these kind of topics that I just could enjoy this instead of being constantly shocked and grossed out, which I think is kind of how you're supposed to react to the content in this book, but I didn't. This book is set in New Lagos, Nigeria, and I feel like the city is the other character. Like people say with Sex and the City, I feel like New Lagos is that in this book. It stands for temptation and corruption. We have a big cast of characters in this book who all have their own POV, and they're mostly connected through the plot, which I think is very thrilling and engaging writing. While the plot is not the most important thing in this book, it is what drives all the characters. So maybe it is very important in this book, but it's like a literary fiction, so it's not usually the main focus. This book opens with a couple who break up and they both get into the New Lagos nightlife. One of them goes to a party of their friends, which is a nightlife party, if you know what I mean. At this party he attacks a man, and that attack sets the whole plot going and has an influence on all of the characters. I found this a very engaging read. I think I read it in a few sittings. The characters were interesting. It reminded me most of The Death of Vivek OJ compared to the other novels by the author. Although this was way more shocking and intense, even though The Death of Vivek OJ is also both of those things. This book goes way further. This book really searches the limits of desire and corruption, and I found it so interesting. It has themes that's definitely sometimes discussed in books, but what is unique about this one is that it's not just the one scene that shocks you and yeah, you keep on reading. No, it's constantly repetitive. And therefore I think New Lagos is also something that the characters describe a lot. What is unique about this book, because it kind of, location causes all these events to repeat themselves constantly with all the characters. I do think you need to be a little bit desensitized, and you really shouldn't mind reading about a lot of these topics. I'm not gonna discuss it here on YouTube, you can look it up if you want to. If you don't really mind reading about those topics, then I would definitely recommend it because it was a really engaging read. I gave it 4 stars. Right, let's head on to the 2 historical fictions I read. First one was from an author I've never heard from before. It was part of the influencers program from Libero FM, and that is The Marriage Season by Jane Dunn. I actually really like this. This is one of those novels where maybe the plot isn't perfect, maybe the pacing is a little bit off, but the characters are just so amazing and so alive. One of those books where you feel like the characters are not just in the novel, they have an entire life of their own, and you can just so easily connect to them and you care what happens to them. We follow 2 sisters, one of whom is a soon-to-be debutante, or they're going to the London season together, and the older sister is a widow and she has a young son, James, which I think is quite a unique thing in a Regency romance when one of the main characters, I mean, they are sometimes widows but not always mothers, and this is a Regency romance, so there's definitely gonna be a romance as well with a young mom, which I feel isn't something we don't really get a lot in romance. When they're still in the country, they meet their neighbors, and the youngest sister actually saves the youngest brother as he has fallen out of a tree, which makes him sound like a little boy, but no, he was an adult man climbing a tree. It was really quite funny. And then his ward, not his brother, his ward, is also someone that they meet, and they meet again later in the London season. So when we start really slow, once we're in the London season, strange things start to happen. Like not magical strange, but just the plot was a bit wild, the pacing was a bit off, but I did find it very engaging. And I also enjoyed how in historical fiction authors kind of open the doors that we don't really see opened in classics of that time, and that's definitely something this author did. Love the characters, would read another book if there will be a sequel, would read it. It had a very much Jane Austen-esque roundup of the plot. It was just really fun and engaging, and I gave it 4 stars. Would definitely recommend listening to the audiobook. Then another somehow Regency romance I read is the 3rd book in a series that I've been casually listening to this year, and that is the Jane Austen or the Pride and Prejudice Chronicles, it's called, I believe. And the 3rd book is from Kitty Bennet's perspective. I did not love Kitty Bennet in book 1 and 2. I don't think you were supposed to love her, but then in book 3 she goes through a transformation, and I really enjoyed her. I did found this book quite far-reaching because Mary Bennet plays a part in this book as well, and if you've read the other Bennet sister, then you have a certain love for Mary Bennet. And Mary Bennet was like a nerdy Lydia Bennet in this book, which was so annoying. I hated her storyline, but it was quite prevalent in some parts of the book, and I felt like there was a big disconnect between the original Jane Austen characters and the main characters of this book. I think the author wanted to continue the series, but I'm not sure how well that worked with existing characters from another author. I think this author probably will do better when they figure out their own characters. Nevertheless, I did enjoy this, and oh my gosh, the love interest in this book, everything. That man was everything. Still, somehow when I finished this, I gave it a 4.5 star. Looking back, it it doesn't feel that high, but apparently I loved it when it ended. So I guess that's the most important thing. I would recommend this series as a whole if you just want a low-key Jane Austen adaptation. I don't think it's like one of the best ones, but it's definitely very, very fun. Unfortunately, I think that was it for the fun reads, because I do have one more non-fiction that I read for the Buzzwordathon that I just didn't really like. I mean, it was fine to listen to, but I felt like it wasn't necessary, and that is The Art Thief by Michael Finkel. If you are really interested in this subject, I think you'll have a great time. Again, when I started listening to this, I thought it was historical. It's not. It's set in the 80s and the 90s. It follows the French Stefan Breitweiser. He steals $2 billion worth of art, which is insane. He is a bit insane. The author views him as someone with certain mental health issues. I think he's very much a kleptomaniac, and he wants to look at art and he wants to own art, to possess it, to take care of it. It's a bit weird, and also maybe a little bit too much romanticization. What I really, really missed in this book is the effect it has on cultural heritage when art is stolen. It was very much just exploring the life of an individual, so of this man who stole together with his girlfriend, and kind of her girlfriend's life as well, from a very true crime perspective. But I just missed something that I think is maybe more important, because stealing property doesn't feel like such a big crime in the sense that, yes, a museum misses a painting, but he didn't use any violence or anything like that. I think it's important to note that art is part of history and cultural heritage, that taking that away from the public and maybe not taking good care of the paintings or of the art or even disposing of it, I think viewing that as a crime is not explored in this book at all, and that was so disappointing to me somehow, because that was the part that I found interesting, because it's something I sometimes think about, but I would like a new perspective on it. So I think what I wanted from this book is not what I got from it. If you are a true crime reader and this sounds fascinating to you, then you might really like this book. I am not sure. Those were the books I've read since my last wrap up. Right now I have started with the non-fiction list for the Women's Prize. I'm reading the Peepshow, and of course the other book, I'll put the cover down here, I forgot the title. Both of which I don't think are like potential winners now that I'm reading them, but I'm enjoying them a lot. I was very hesitant to read the Peepshow because, again, true crime. I really dislike true crime, but this seemed like a more feminist new perspective on a true crime case, like The Five, which I really, really enjoyed. So I gave it a go. I do still think it's very much a true crime, but I'm very entertained. It sprinkles in some feminism, but I feel like the author did that for the sake of it, not to enhance the book as a whole, but we'll see. Let's just first finish it. And then the other book I find really, really interesting. It's a bit confusing because we have 4 different people whose life we follow, but the structure of the book makes it a little bit confusing, because between some of the people there are quite a few similarities, which of course makes sense because they're all from the same generation. It's all my generation. It's so strange to read about like mini bios from people growing up and being like in their 20s and everything from your own generation. It's so strange. I've not experienced that before, I think, but I find it interesting because then when they mention that something happened in 2009, and then I can very easily compare what my life was back then in the Netherlands and what their life in China was like. It's very interesting. I'm really appreciating that. I'm not sure how interesting it is for people who are a much earlier or much later generation who cannot really personally relate to those events, but I'm really excited to read more of the Women's Prize. I know there were more books on my TBR, but I have paused them because I just wanted to start the Women's Prize. For February I kind of did the Buzzwordathon, but I DNF'd the book. The book worked for both prompts, but since I'm DNFing it, I don't know if it counts, just gonna say it counts. For March I wasn't able to match the prompt, but for the first prompt we need a title that has the word thing in it. So I'm gonna read another Shakespeare because it's been a while. I'm going to read Much Ado About Nothing. I did see the film, so I know it is a bit insane, a bit crazy. It's definitely a comedy. I'm not sure how much I love the story, but we'll see the original one. I think it is about a couple who is supposed to get married, and then someone claims that a woman has done something, probably that she's not a virgin anymore or something ridiculous like that, and then the whole wedding party and everyone involved explodes. It's what I remember of it. I think it's gonna be fun, and of course you have thing in the title. For the cover prompt, you need a book on the cover. So I decided I wanted to listen to another historical / fantasy audiobook. And this is the one that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. Uprooted by Naomi Novik. This is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, but a very loose one. I think our main character is picked to be with the Beast for 10 years because, or he's called the Dragon in this book, because every 10 years the dragon picks a girl from the village to live with him. And it's a bit weird. She didn't think she would be picked because she's not the cleverest, she's not the most beautiful, but he picks her because of something I'm not gonna mention because I think that's a spoiler. But he picks her and then she moves into the tower. I'm a few hours in of this right now, but I think I'll finish it in March, so I'll count it for the Buzzwordathon for March. The Women's Prize. I want to read in March Ember of the Hands, Hidden Histories of the Viking Age. This seems really fun, and this was actually the only historical book I think on the list that actually interested me. Well, I love, of course, reading about history. The other two books just didn't really interest me. It was an art book, an art biography, which didn't work for me. One about 2 English royals that also didn't interest me. But these are like fun little details about the Viking Age and about all the stuff they used, as you can see on the cover, which seems so fun. It's not as chunky as I thought it would be. I thought it was like a 700-page, very chunky book. It has illustrations as well. So yeah, I'm quite excited to start reading this in March. And of course I want to keep on reading the 2 books I'm reading right now. I'm sure we'll finish those in March as well. And of course I want to read book 3 of Kristin Lavrensdatter. I think it is called The Wreath. Oh, The Cross. The Wreath is book 1. The Cross is book 3. And I want to thank Mary for gifting this to me. I don't know if I said it yet, but she gave me this beautiful edition. Which I now also added to the shop, by the way, because I'm enjoying the book so much. I have 2 more classics. The third one is for the Thomas Hardy Readalong, and this is the Trumpet Major. I think this is one of the thinnest Thomas Hardy books that we've ever read. This is our winter read, so I'm going to finish it up in March. Not that I've started yet, but I'm gonna read it in March, and I think at the end of March we will have a live show for this one. We follow a girl called Anne. She lives with her widowed mother. Yes, she lives together with her widowed mother and they live in a mill. And she has 3 suitors and she has to pick. I think one of the suitors is the Trumpet Major. This sounds kind of like Far From Men in Crowd. Pretty similar. So we'll see if I like it. Together with a few friends of mine, Sarah, Lucy and Mary, we are going to read some books just privately with the 4 of us because some of them don't have a channel anymore. And we wanted to read a classic fantasy, and I said let's read Ursula K. Le Guin, and Sarah said she was most interested in The Left Hand of Darkness. I've been wanting to read some Ursula K. Le Guin because someone told me that it's like environmental feminism, which sounds fascinating. So we follow 2 people who make a journey over the ice. What they have in common is curiosity about others and themselves and an almost unshakable belief that the world can be a better place. That sounds fascinating. I'm really glad we're going to read this together. I think we're gonna start in March. We'll probably take a really long time to actually finish the book, which is fine. So I don't know if I'll finish it in March, but I'll chat to you a little bit about it in next month's video. And then, did I mention yet, we have a new book club, Paws and Pages, which I'm doing together with Sophia, Shannon and Mary. We're going to read a book bi-monthly. We're going to read new or newer releases by authors that we enjoy or that we've enjoyed in the past, or it's like a debut that we're really excited about, but it's all about newer releases. And we're going to read Julia by Sandra Newman. This is a play on 1984, but from the perspective of Julia. This book is Shannon's pick, but I'm actually really excited to read it. When she said that this was on her radar, I said yes please. I read 1984 I think about 2 years ago, and I was quite curious about Julia. I found her very poorly written, so let's see what Sandra Newman is going to do with her character. Yeah, I think this is gonna be as apocalyptic and scary and big brothery or of course Big Brother as 1984. But I definitely think that Julia might be a more interesting character. So we'll see. I'm not gonna reread 1984 before I read this because it's not one of my favorite books. I mean, I'm glad I read it, but I hope this one will give me a little bit more. This is my physical TBR for March, but of course on the 4th of March we're getting the long list for the Women's Prize for Fiction, which I'm so excited about. It's the reason I only picked The Embers of the Hands for the long list for non-fiction, because I want to combine it. I don't just want to start the non-fiction and do the fiction afterwards. I want to read both long lists simultaneously. In the past I've done just a short list, but I want to read the books that speak to me most, not necessarily to the wider Women's Prize audience. Last year with the non-fiction prize I read a lot of non-fiction on the list, but not the winner, which I'm hoping won't happen again this year. I have predicted the fiction list winner 2 years in a row. Like once I've read the books, of course. So I'm hoping I can do that again. They were also my winners and one of my favorite books of both years. So I'm expecting to definitely find some favorite books within the long list. I am thinking of doing just sit down videos kind of like this about the Women's Prize long list. They're gonna be called the Women's Prize Diaries. How original. But I'll keep you updated through those more low-key vlog style videos. It's not gonna be like a Women's Prize vlog, just me sitting down and giving you reviews of the books I've read of both long lists. So if that sounds interesting to you, then be sure to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you have a lovely day or evening, and I hope to see you in the next one. Doei!